But I think what intuitive stuff is our ability to access our knowing at a higher level. I think that's everybody's gift. And people can call it psychic, but your intuitive nature is an aspect of you. It's the part of you who knows. My guides call it the true self. They say the true
Mm,
self knows, the small self thinks. And
mm,
when you're given information, at an intuitive level, it's usually there to be worked with.
mm.
One has to develop discernment. I've read for people that said, well, the voice told me to move across the country and buy the house next door next to the guy they said I would be with. And the guy gets an order of protection with good reason. It's like wishful thinking, and that's.
Welcome everybody to the Heart Coherence Collaborative. We're so excited today to have Paul Selig with us.
Yes, this is actually really a dream come true for me.
Mm.
Kyle said, who is your dream person to have on? And you were one of my people. So it's almost surreal that we have you here. And I'm just so grateful, so grateful.
And in the process of having her love you, I started getting into your material and it blew me away. So I'm very grateful you're here as well. So your official bio, Paul Selig is considered to be one of the foremost spiritual channels working today. In his breakthrough works of channeled literature, Paul has recorded an extraordinary program for personal and planetary evolution as humankind awakens to its own divine nature. Paul offers channeled workshops internationally and serves on the faculty of the Omega Institute, the Kripalu Center, and the Esalen Institute. Also a noted educator, he served on the faculty of NYU for over 25 years and directed the MFA in the creative writing program at Goddard College. He lives in New York City, where he maintains a private practice as an intuitive and conducts frequent live stream seminars. Paul, welcome, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. You have an old bio. I now live in Maui.
Oh, that's
yes,
you know what? I actually did know that. Yeah.
Yes.
I lived in Hawaii for a year.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would love for people who don't know your story to hear about who you were a little bit before and what the experience was like of the process of receiving information and becoming a channel.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm still me. I mean, it's a long process. It's nothing that I expected or anticipated or was even wanting. And I think that that's kind of important. This wasn't my dream job. I had been raised sort of an atheist, I was a New York City kid in the 60s. We went to therapy. We didn't go to church. And, that was sort of how I was raised. And I had a list of things that I thought I needed to do or to achieve by the time I was 25 that would make me okay in the world. And it was a very flashy list, and I got the whole list, and I wasn't okay by, really any stretch of the imagination. And really, I always say, out of sheer necessity, and not because I thought it would be nice to get spiritual, because I didn't even know what a spiritual life was or why one would want one or that one could even have one. I actually began praying for the first time. And I was actually sort of in this motel room, really, the Gopher Campus Motor Lodge in St. Paul, Minnesota. I was working on a project there, and I didn't know where to find the drugs in St. Paul. And the Gideons leave these books in the drawers of hotel rooms. And I actually took it out, and I saw prayer for people in crisis. And I didn't know what my crisis was, to be honest. I was a 25-year-old kid. I was a year out of Yale. I was having a flashy little career. But I knew I was in one, and I said it, and 3 days later, I woke up. I was back in New York, and I asked what I could do for myself that day that was positive, and I actually heard a voice, the first voice. And when I say I heard a voice, it's not something in the room. It's a thought or a series of words that blocks out my ordinary thoughts, that has its own texture. It's like when you know something is true, you just know it. And I knew it was true, and I listened and I followed on it, and I found myself embarking on a spiritual life. So there was this thing happening. This is back in 1987, when I was 25, which will tell you how old I am. And I heard there was this thing happening. People were calling it the harmonic convergence, and that people were going to be waking up. And I thought, well, if there is a God, And I was beginning to think maybe there was something like that. And you asked to be woken up, why would it want to say no? So I went up to the roof of this building that I was living in, somebody's house in Manhattan. And the night before this thing, and I asked to be woken up. And I think I actually believe this. I think this was the key. I believe that something could or would happen. And I went up with real innocence, and I ended up having an experience, and it may have just been me hyperventilating. I didn't know anything about breath work in those days. I was just doing this little mantra somebody had given me, which turned out to be a Kundalini mantra. I didn't know what Kundalini was, and holding on to this crystal. Somebody gave me that too. I thought you needed all the props for this, but I had an energetic experience that, and I started seeing little lights around people after that. So I was opening up. I ended up going to an energy healer for a little while that somebody recommended to give me context. And then I began to study myself. And I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I could hear things for them. So if I had my hand on your chest, I heard the name Jeffrey. I learned to say, who's Jeffrey? You might say my brother, my lover, my dog, my father, whatever. But as I kept getting confirmation of the information that I was getting, I began to trust it. And I was developing as a clairaudient and as a clairsentient, clear feeling. People call it being an empath, but it's like, this was a whole other thing that I didn't have context for at all. So I'm not a trained channel, or psychic, which is one of the things that I do now. Although I've been doing it for a long time, it's nothing I've ever trained in, and I didn't know that I could do any of this until I was actually doing it. And then I had to learn to understand it, because it was always a bit of a mind bender. I was volunteering at this center for people that were living with life-challenging illnesses in New York. I was teaching at NYU. I had this whole other life as a college teacher. I started to do a little group that met in my apartment once a week, just because I like being in the energy. And that's when I began to hear for the group, which was the beginning of channeling. And that group met for about 18 years in my apartment. I took a few years off, I think, in the middle when I just said I'm fed up with this. But that's really where I was developed and trained. I hear people now, they watch a YouTube video 2 days later, they're saying I'm channeling a book, and I'm going, oh, there was a real process for me of being taught. And I really feel that my energy system was being developed in order to do this. And at a certain point, many years, and people would drop 10, 20 bucks in a basket. That was it. Sometimes I had 3 people, sometimes 10. Enough to buy a pizza or something was fine with me. But when I was probably in about 2009, the guides had begun lecturing, and all I knew was I was talking a lot more than I used to. And I was never interested in the information that was coming through me. Truthfully, I was interested in the energy because it was palpable. You could feel it. And if you can feel it, you can't fake it. It was there in the room. We all felt it. Sometimes it was, you ever see that old movie Beetlejuice, where everybody like the dinner parties? Sometimes it was like that. The guides would say, we're going to put an energy on everybody's forehead. We'd all go boom, So I loved that because it was real and tangible, palpable, and beautiful, and very loving, loving, loving energy. And one day they said, I'd just gotten let go from a writing gig. And I had been done with writing, and I decided I was done. And a friend of mine called me and said, this would be a good time to write a memoir about how you became a clairaudient. And I said, I have no interest in writing. And the guides piped in and they said, well, we have a book to write. Wow. And if you take 2 weeks, we'll do it. And I had just gotten, canned from something, and my self-esteem was in the shithouse, and I could have cared less, truthfully. I really could have cared less. I had time on my hands. So I said, okay, not expecting that anything would happen. And 2 days later, we met on the phone, and I had a CD recorder on the arm of my chair, and the guides dictated this book called I Am the Word. And it took 2.5 weeks because I took 2 days off to go teach at NYU. And now there are 10 books. The 10th one is coming out in the fall. And they take usually between a month, and depends on how often I work. In those days, I was doing it every day, and I can't. Now I can do 3-4 days a week, and I don't do 2-hour sittings anymore. I'll do 1 hour at the most, usually at one time, unless I'm doing a public event. Most of the books now have been dictated in front of audiences at this point. So, and the books are the unedited transcripts of these teachings, these channelings. We don't go back and make them pretty. In fact, I have to undo the copy edits most times that the copy editor or the publisher wants to make, because the guides, it's a verbal teaching that's transcribed. It's not a book that anybody sat down and typed. There's no typing involved except to transcribe the recordings. So this has been going on now for about 11 years. And I left my academic life maybe 5-6 years ago now. And this is what I do. And this is how it happened. I'm grateful for this. I may never understand how it happened. I don't know how to teach people to channel. I don't know how it happened to me. Truthfully, channeling, in my opinion, is stenography. Real channeling is stenography. It's not, oh, look at the wonderful messages I'm bringing through. It's, this is what they have to say, and this is what it is. And you actually have to be somewhat neutral to the transmission. Other than that, you're going to start to mess with it. So, my work is to be the courtroom stenographer for these guides that come through and teach and bring through energy and attune people. And then when I work as a psychic, which is something that developed through all of this, I'm more involved. When I'm channeling, I say like I'm in the back seat of the car reading a magazine. When I'm reading, I'm putting the steering wheel back and forth with the guides, because I get to interpret in a reading. Whereas in a channeling, there's no interpretation. It's language and direction. So that's the story pretty much.
That's remarkable. You have such a fascinating journey. And, you had mentioned, nowadays everybody's a channel, not like you, but one struggle that I had in my journey early on in my meditations, when I first started meditating, I was having these powerful messages come through me. Like my grandfather would come see me, and then I would have these images of pharaohs, and then I would have a 5-dimensional pyramid, and these things were coming to me. But I didn't really feel like I could talk to anybody about it. When I went to go see the local channels, it was like, oh, you're an Egyptian god or something, but I wasn't really getting anything that I felt comfortable with, or like any way of knowing. Yeah. So what advice would you have for somebody that's getting some messages but doesn't know what to do with them?
Well, I think the messages have to play out in some way. You have to have verification for them. What would help me to trust what was coming through me was the energy that we could feel. And the fact that on a very simple level, I am not capable of closing my eyes and dictating a 300-page book that doesn't require editing. So I had to go, something's going on. It's not me. But, I'm an old-time 12-stepper, and in the 12 steps literature somewhere it says, going it alone in spiritual affairs, I don't know what the exact quote is, but can be dangerous. And I think that there's a reason that it's helpful to have a check system. I've been fortunate in my experience to have other psychics or mentors for me. Somebody who's going to tell you, oh, you saw a pyramid because you're a pharaoh. You see, I'm very wary of information that is sort of being utilized to pump up the ego or specialness, because that tends to be low-level stuff. And that's one of the ways people can get sort of hooked into, self-importance. And when the moment it becomes about that, I think it gets a little bit distorted. It's a trap. We all sort of, I think, will face in one way, and then you have to move through it to the other side. But I would say, if you're getting impressions, keep a journal. If your grandfather was showing up and you were seeing things, you may be a wonderful psychic. And there are people that teach psychic development and that are good, and that's what they do. A lot of them are teaching mediumship, which is speaking to the other side, because there are wonderful ways to teach that. I'm a medium for the living. So if your grandfather was alive in a nursing home, and even, not very coherent, I could probably hear him pretty well and be accurate. And that's a lot of my work. I'm a medium for the living, because on the other side, I might not get him. I would get him as he was when he was alive and be able to help you or anybody with a dynamic that exists with someone who's crossed. So you can study. I have a friend, Laura Day, who teaches, development online and does live, I think, free Instagram stuff, so people are doing it. I think I always just say, find somebody who's been around a while, who's got some chops. Because what chops kind of means, you've stuck it out a little bit. and you've walked through some of the fire, because anybody, I think, who does this stuff, and certainly does what I do, part of doing what I do is you're really forced to confront your stuff. You don't get a free pass. It's a mandate, and that, I'm not saying that I've done it, and I certainly don't claim to be enlightened or awakened. I'm not. I'm a guy on the path like everybody else. I don't think I'm special. I think I have a very odd ability that I think has been developed over, you can say, lifetimes, but certainly in this life. And I'm happy to show up for it and learn through it. So I would say, find a friend who's not going to just say, oh, wow, you heard it, so it must be so, because that's a trap.
Yeah.
And, but find somebody who's good to go in there with you, because this is what I believe. If it's true, it's always true. I have 2 people or 3 people at any given time that I can call on if I'm in a situation where I need another eye. Most people who do what I do and what you may be able to do don't really read for themselves, because we're invested in the outcome. So if I have a situation and I want another point of view, I've got a couple of people I call. They always tell me the same thing because it's the same information. So I trust it. You know what I mean? It exists at a certain level. So don't know if I was any help. I'm all for people exploring their intuitive natures. And I will say that I tend to make a distinction between channeling, which I think is a specific act of being the transmitter for a higher consciousness, which is rarely convenient, rarely about, the news of the day. It's not usually about pop culture. I don't think my guides could care less if Princess Di was killed, or I don't think it's like that's not what they're about. They're teachers, they've got their own thing. But I think what intuitive stuff is our ability to access our knowing at a higher level. I think that's everybody's gift. And people can call it psychic, but your intuitive nature is an aspect of you. It's the part of you who knows. My guides call it the true self. They say the true self knows, the small self thinks. And when you're given information, at an intuitive level, it's usually there to be worked with. One has to develop discernment. I've read for people that said, well, the voice told me to move across the country and buy the house next door next to the guy they said I would be with. And the guy gets an order of protection with good reason. It's like wishful thinking, and that's happened a few times. Or I've had somebody once say, well, I've been told I'm the next channel for so-and-so once the person dies. And I go, I don't think it works that way. I really don't. I don't think that's how it operates. So discernment is really just staying clear and clean and neutral to a certain extent, if possible, to what comes through. This wasn't an easy adjustment for me. I wanted to go, oh, goody, I'm channeling a book now. I was going, oh my God, I'm sitting here in a chair talking for 2 hours at a time. When I get off the chair, I can barely walk. I feel completely stoned. I don't know if this makes any sense, but it was exciting to type up the recordings and see that they did make sense. And again, and they always made sense. And now I don't type them up at all. Somebody else does, thank God, because it took more time to type a book from the recordings, which is a really exacting process, than it is to proofread it, which is what I do now. So that's it. So I think we all have ability, and I think we can all access ability. And I think your intuitive nature, your ability to access higher information, is your birthright, everybody's birthright. You have to tune into it. If you want to be a channel, some people call their intuitive stuff channeled, and maybe that's just languaging. But I tend to make the distinction because I don't edit the books. I don't get to, it's not my book to edit. You know what I mean? That's how I look at it. It's not my stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, I'm wondering what you did to nurture your ability to be a receiver, to be in that frequency, because I think I have an imaginary idea that somebody almost would have to be pre-enlightened to be a receiver. Or when you said you were a bit in the shit when you channeled the first book, it was kind of surprising to me.
I was in the shit when I channeled. I didn't know what was happening. I mean, I knew I'd been channeling for a while. I'd never done a book. It actually was really effortless to do. It was just physically challenging. Channeling for me is it's a physical act.
Yeah.
It takes a lot out of me. When I had been a kid in my early 20s and late 20s, I was, I had studied as a playwright. I used to put on a piece of music that felt like the play that I was writing and on loop. And hours, and I would just sit there going like that. What I was actually doing was inducing a light trance without even knowing that I was doing it. But I was also a hard partying kid, so I was low level stuff. I was not that I was I was good at what I was doing.
Mhm.
What I found, and this was important, that when I developed through studying healing, and it was never about me. It was about something for somebody else. And truthfully, when I look at how I developed, it was always in service to somebody, something else. It wasn't to get what I wanted, to find out if the person I liked would like me back. It's just, it didn't do that way. I did when I was in my 30s, and I studied a form of healing that's no longer being taught. I was actually a very devoted student for a period of time, and I spent hours daily doing energy work and clearing myself. And I don't even know how to begin doing that with other people, although the guides that I work with do. And if you look at their books, they're really telling us how we can clear out in order to open up, to become who and what we truly are. I think to become receptive means to let go of the idea of what it's supposed to be, how it's supposed to sound, what people are going to think of it. I mean, occasionally I'll see somebody, scrolling through social media, sort of sitting there going like this and saying, beloveds, here I am today. And I go, oh, brother, maybe that's how it is for them. I don't want to knock it. For me, I'm sitting in a chair, wobbling with this whole thing. And all I'm doing is trying to keep up with the dictation. That's the job. And see, so I'm not, in a lot of ways, I don't look right. I don't sound right. I'm not doing this in a way, I'm not wearing all white and, I'm just not doing it that way. If it was who I was, I would do it that way. It's just not. And everybody shows up differently for this. And I don't know that somebody once said to me, an interviewer, why don't you channel the right way? And my guides came through going, ha, 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 as if there's a right way to channel, because it's all so crazy to begin with. It's like this shouldn't be happening. That's how I look at it. It shouldn't be happening. And it does, not just through me. There are wonderful people out there, I'm sure, who are bringing through really high information. And I think the way to assess a channel, and just as my opinion, is there fear, and is the transmission about fear? Is it fear-based? My guides can shake people up, but they don't teach in fear, and I'm grateful for that. And is it sort of self-aggrandizing and for the club? Like, here's for my tribe today. It's like, if everybody's the tribe. Screw the tribalism. Everybody's the tribe. We're in a world situation now. Everybody's in the tribe. This factionalism has just got to end. So, truth is truth. And when people, I believe, are in an encounter with truth, they feel it, they recognize it. And that's what I always go towards. If it's true, if it feels true, it's true. Not if it's convenient or what I want to hear, which is something perhaps a little bit different.
I love what you said about service to others. I'm a 12-step guy myself. And I'm curious if you believe that service to others allows the channel for spirit to be open.
I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that. They just said yes. That's why I just heard it from them. Yes, and more. They're saying you're serving God when you're serving others. And that's why it's the same act. It's the same act. They're basically taking care of another. Basically, they're saying it's God taking care of God. The divine within, acknowledging the divine within another. And I would add to that, doing what's required, So yeah, I never thought of that. the information that I get from myself almost exclusively is in the moment and of the moment. And it's usually about not taking actions in fear. And occasionally my guides will stop me from screwing something up badly by saying not wise, not a good idea. But they honor free will. And that's the other thing. I think a high guide will always honor free will. When somebody says, my guide is telling me I have to, I go, my guides did tell me that I needed to stop smoking. And I was a very, very heavy smoker until 2008. And it was 2009 that the book started coming, and it made a big, big difference. But they had said, we want to continue to work with you, and we're not going to be able to unless you address this. And so I did, and they helped, and that was a relief. But I don't get what I want from this. I get more than I could have asked for, but nobody's given me the lottery numbers. Nobody's hooked me up with my life partner yet. I'm like, come on, guides already. I'm waiting. It hasn't happened yet. But I think the idea of service to others, in a lot of ways, it's how we forget ourselves. And when we forget ourselves is how this happened. You asked how to open up to be receptive. It's a fair amount about self-forgetting. It's about moving your consciousness to the back seat of the car and allowing the higher to come forward. But you only do that when you really trust the energy that you're working with. Just because somebody doesn't have a body and is chatty doesn't mean you want to take advice from them, That's not necessarily the wisest way to go about anything.
It makes sense to me, talking about that your channeling was in service, because I think when we get involved with self, there's so much fear involved. I notice it's a lot easier for me to dream somebody else's dreams into existence, to focus on that. And one of the most beautiful and profound things that I'm learning this lesson over and over again, that when you create through fear, you create what you fear.
Yeah.
That line changed. I feel like that changed my entire knowing.
It's one of the best. It's one of the teachings, a few things that they always say, like in every lecture, and that's one of them. They've said the action of fear is to claim more fear. And every choice you make in fear gets you more of the same. And I looked at my life and I found it to be true, almost without exception. But, they do, interestingly enough, spend a fair amount of time talking about prudence and why prudence isn't fear, because people can run with this stuff and get real stupid. So I can say, I don't drink because I'm scared of what would happen, and then that's a fear-based action. I don't drink because I'm not stupid. Why would I want to go do that again? It's not necessarily going to get me what I want. It didn't the last time. So it's been a long time. I don't want it. But, it's like somebody said, well, does this mean I shouldn't worry about my bills because paying my bills is an act of fear? And it's like, no, it's not. It's your responsibility. You bought the thing, you got to pay for it. That's just basic grown-up stuff. And, sometimes the guides say things like, like if you live in a cabin in the woods, chop firewood. Don't be stupid if it's going to snow there in the winter. That's not fear. That's prudence. You want to, plan. Be careful. Don't skate when it says thin ice. Don't swim where it says sharks. Prudence, not fear.
I would be curious to see if you could potentially elaborate on if there was any reasoning the guides gave to why cigarettes would block them from coming through.
Listen, I was a 4-pack a day smoker. So I was like coughing so hard I was falling out of the chair, and I probably should be dead, and I'm lucky I'm not. I will tell you what happened when I stopped. First of all, my psychic abilities started to kick in when I stopped drinking when I was 25. It's almost 36 years ago now that happened. And I didn't know what to make of it. But what I did discover was I was highly sensitive, and I had been doing everything humanly possible to dampen my sensitivity. I'll still eat. It's the one thing I'll still do. to do that, which doesn't serve me.
Mm.
What I found what the smoke did, what the cigarettes did, because it was protection, as is weight for me, but it was existing in a little cloud of smoke that was sort of impenetrable.
Yeah.
When I stopped, and some of this just may have been chemical, my sensitivity went through the roof. And I was astonished by it. I mean, I literally, how I saw the world. I lived in New York City for many years. When I stopped smoking, I saw the architecture of the buildings. I saw the detail in the carvings. It was like, what the hell? Maybe it was like tripping. I don't do that. It's not important. That medicine isn't part of my path. But I was like, I was tripping.
Yeah.
And what I found was that there was far less muck to push through for the transmission. So all I did was clean up the channel. That's how I look at it. You know, I do eat meat still, you know, maybe one day I won't. And the guides have talked about this in their own weird way. So you know, I have, but I have friends that are good psychics that have a glass of wine every night. You know, it's certainly, or love tobacco and say it grounds them. And I'm not going to say that that's not true either. I think people are different and people have different constitutions. I'm not necessarily wired up for that. I'm wired up for what I'm doing, and I really feel. You know, my old teacher, Ethel, was an old healing teacher. She's no longer living, but she used to say, "Stay in your body, because if you're not in your body, who is?" You know. So I'm a proponent of staying in the body. You know, and that doesn't mean that I can't access what's higher. It just doesn't mean that I'm not trying to check out all the time for this stuff. I think this stuff finally one learns about sort of integrating, you know, the guys like, you know, that old teaching, being in the world but not of it. Finally, it's being, you got to be practical, but also you're accessing what's already there. You know, people think that people are creating these things. We're just accessing. It's like a radio station. That's how I look at it. It's a radio station that's always playing. That I didn't know that I could. The radio that I was could tune to. So my guides teach through attunement. They're tuning everybody's radios to be able to play the broadcast. That doesn't necessarily mean the guides broadcast. It means the energy that they come with, which is not theirs per se. It's the Christ consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. It's palpable and kind of wonderful to feel, and it does alter the structure of things. That's my experience of it.
Beautiful.
I have directly experienced the feeling of being altered by it's the message. And then I do believe, because I've read and listened to audiobooks, so I really feel there is something in your voice too, that I've felt it, that it changes me. I've never really felt that so much from anything I consumed in any way. But it leads me, that idea, and just the talk of making good choices, to think about the concept of free will, which gets talked about a lot. And I always have this little hold up to, when I think about free will, to think sometimes the quality of someone's life, the life that they were born into, which you figure is the sum of the machine you were born into and your experience, it almost seems as if, due to trauma, due to someone's life, that they almost are powerless in their choices. Certainly in addiction, people experience powerlessness.
Absolutely. You know, and that's where the idea of grace comes in, truthfully, and something bigger. I didn't, you know, it's when my personal will fails me, is often when I surrender to the universe and say, I don't know how to do this, or I can't fix this, or I don't know what I'm doing anymore. And then I become available to something. I personally believe that we're party to the circumstances that we're born into at a certain level, and that there become opportunities to learn certain things. And, you know, I do believe that there are people that we encounter in a life that we have things to work out with from the past. and the circumstances present themselves. The guides I work with talk about free will. Other people don't believe in it. It's all destined. Doesn't matter what you think you're choosing, because you couldn't choose any other way. But I have to say, there's a couple of times in my life, two that I can think of. Well, three. I told you one. I heard the voice. I acted on it. It changed my life in a good way. I probably would have been dead if I didn't listen at that time. But there were two times in my life, and it was early in my journeying, when the guides, I didn't know I was channeling at that point. I mean, I wasn't channeling. I would pray and I would get an answer. It was like a big answer. I'm like, bang. When I think it must have taken them to get through to me, given how dense I was a lot. But there were two times when I had enormous knowing and I didn't honor it. One was basically end a relationship, and I didn't want to, because I was in love and it was bad. It took me 2 freaking years to get over that thing. It was so bad. I could have saved myself, I suspect, an enormous amount of pain. I knew to get out, and I didn't. And one was a professional thing in one of my other work that I was doing, not this stuff. And I knew to say no to something, and I said yes, because it was one of those. This actually happened twice. Why wouldn't I say yes? Anybody would say yes. It's a great offer. You can't refuse. And the pain was enormous. So I was instructed, and I didn't honor it. And I'm very aware, for the most part now, when I feel like I'm going against myself, how uncomfortable it feels. Like the guides say, there's never a lie that's been told that wasn't told in fear. And I believe that. And I can't do it. I get too uncomfortable. It makes me sick. It's like, ugh. I mean, not even not even like, oh, I'd love to see you tonight, but I'm going to watch a movie. It's like, that's not, I can't do it. I got to find some other neutral, non-lying way. I'd love to see you. It's just not a good time. That's fair. That's fair. No lie, no movie, nothing made up. So the guides talk a lot about will, and they talk about the alignment of the will, the personal will and the divine will. So it's this old idea, and this was an old thing, and I had a sense early in my recovery days that my will was terrible and a bad thing, and you have to give it over because you screwed it up so bad. And that's really, and it made me very passive for a number of years, and I was very valuable, and I learned a lot through it. But there's a difference between thy will, not mine, be done is an enormously healthy and powerful prayer to release outcome and attachment. But there's another way of operating, which was, thy will and mine, however you want to say it, are one. We become one, or we become the demonstration or the action of the higher will. And all that means, I think, is just another way of saying you're in alignment, because the true self, or the divine self as you, isn't going to wish anybody harm, isn't going to lie, isn't going to, rage, as far as I know, may have other things to do to deal with injustice. And, because I think that the true self is deeply invested in truth and high outcome, but it's not big on recrimination and blame and shame. Those are small self things. So I think that we can move to these places, but I actually think we do have will. I chose to stay on the diet I'm on today. By dinner, I may choose to go off it, So I know that I have a part in these things, So
I would love to hear your advice on if somebody is stuck in that place where like they have that choice coming up, where I think you said twice in your life you chose probably maybe something that was against your higher self. But it's like you have this thing in front of you that you feel like your soul's calling to you, and then you have all this weight holding you down. Like what can just give people that extra push to make that decision and go for it?
the knowledge that one has the right to live the life that they want, there's permission for that, I think, is part of the issue, because a lot of us don't, or we're told that we don't. I've broken a lot of the rules that I was raised with about how I'm supposed to be in the world.
Mm.
And I've been challenged every time, and none of it was comfortable ever, and deeply uncomfortable. Um, and what I kind of learned from that is, well, that's what you have to do to be free from that. I'm not saying I'm there yet, but I'm better than I was. I'm living a life now that I didn't expect I would ever live. Truthfully, I'm shocked by it. You know,
Mm.
I've lived in New York my whole life, and apartments and with neighbors upstairs and downstairs, and I'm noise sensitive. It used to make me crazy. And I'm living in the jungle now. I'm just learning to drive. I'm 60 years old. I just got my learner's permit. It's like, I never thought I would do this, but I'm living in the rainforest without a car. you know it's the funniest thing, and I barely know how to cook, and I'm having a lovely experience of being,
Yeah.
which I never believed I could have, but I had to say, okay,
Mm.
let's step into the unknown and see.
Mm.
So when somebody's stuck, I don't know. It helps to know why one is stuck or what the attachment is. It's usually fear-based. It's
Yeah.
usually fear. So I don't know. Without being a specific example, I can give you a specific answer, a specific person. I could tell you why. That's what I do a lot in my practice.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, so say basically like work, it's like you have maybe something in your calling where you want to serve people, but that's not necessarily gonna pay the bills that you have, for
It
example.
doesn't have to. And I think that's one of the screwy things about sort of
Mm.
spiritual culture. And I put quotes around the culture. People think that their work needs to be their spiritual stuff.
Mm.
It's how you show up for whatever you're doing. It's the part of you that shows up for whatever you're doing. That's what's important. My
Mm.
spiritual practice, and I mean this sincerely, for 25 years, most of my adult life was teaching college. I learned how to love. I learned what teaching was. And it was the one place in my life when I wasn't miserable and selfish. I was just in the total, and I learned so much. And it was preparing me in every way for work that I do now. I found out 10 years before I stopped teaching that I couldn't use lecture notes anymore. I couldn't.
Mm.
And I had to let it come through. And then it was like surfing. It was amazing. So I was being prepped.
Mm.
But the guides I work with they say how one serves is how one is most fully expressed as the true self.
Mm.
That's how you walk down the street, how you smile at your neighbor, how you. It doesn't have to mean. I mean, there's only so many life coaches and yoga studios and Reiki masters the
Mm.
world needs, but everybody's here at the same party, and here's the screwy thing: it's all spiritual.
Mm.
Mm.
It's all spiritual.
Yeah.
It does just because it's not part of the lexicon of things you might check off on the list of oh cool. Now, if you're not doing work that you care about, that's something different.
Mm.
And doing work that you care about, I do think is important. And I do think that people have to ask themselves
Mm.
what they might do with their time if they could do anything. Because very often that's the key to what might bring them joy. And usually, somewhere in the world, somebody's getting paid for it. I say this once in a while. There was a story. There was an attorney, and a successful one, that came to me for a reading years ago and was unhappy. And I tuned into him and I said, "You're not going to want to hear this, but I'm seeing you tending bar."
Mm.
And he looked at me so wistfully, and he said, "The happiest summer of my life was after college when I spent tending bar."
Oof. Mm.
And this is somebody might have had a beautiful life as a bartender, you
Yeah.
know, and been joyful in his experience of it. But we live in a world where maybe that's not good enough, because if you're a lawyer, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's just a bunch of cultural stuff,
Mm.
what we make important and what we value. So but I'm the first person to say to people, and I say it to clients often, they say, well, I want to quit my corporate job and do Reiki. I say, well, make sure you can make a living, because it takes a long time for most people to build a practice or to get the skill set. And I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but I had my own practice when I started doing readings, and it did develop and it did build, and now it's very healthy and has been for some time. But I waited to leave my academic life until I really trusted this, because I was quitting a career, in my 50s, when other people are getting ready to retire. And I'm saying I wanted to make sure I could pay my insurance and, all those things. So, I tend to be more prudent than some people.
I
Some
enjoy
people
that
say
advice.
time to go up and let's just give it a shot. Anyway, I'm going on. Forgive me.
I love that answer. It's all spiritual.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm thinking about, the backbone of everything is this, how we're blocked with fear, how that affects us. So what it really is a good process for becoming unblocked from that, from getting that sense of alignment with whatever you call God or your higher self, where your will is really meeting that.
Well, I don't know that we get to sort of bypass it, which is not look at it. I think I still have fear. I'm much less fearful than I used to be. I used to be terribly, terribly fearful, and I'm better. And I always say, I'm not a spiritual teacher. I'm not a guru. I'm this person does this work, and at times I can interpret well what the guides teach, and times not so good because they correct me. But what the guides teach in their books, they talk about the upper room, which is a level of consciousness and vibration that one can align to. And when they often in their workshops and online or in person, they'll bring their students to the upper room. And one of the first things they'll often say is, what do you fear when you're here? And the answer is, there's nothing. And the answer is nothing, because they say fear doesn't express at that level of vibration or tone. We're living in a collective field. They say this is a field, it's a collective field. We're all contributing it through our consciousness. We're all participatory to this idea of reality that we're sharing. And they talk about it as an octave of music, an octave of tones, series of notes. And they say any song can be sung in a higher octave. And the act of transposing tone is very much the act of what they do with their students. And the upper room, they just say, is the octave above where we've been operating from. And they teach us, I think, progressively and slowly how to manage it and maintain it. And I know that if I get triggered, because I do, I'm back downstairs, and then I have the opportunity to see what the hell is messing with me. And I don't think this is about not being human. I just think it's about not being so reactive to stimuli, to be poked by everything so that we're always unmoored or frightened or grabbing for something that we think will hold us. But I think the process of moving, the guy talked a lot about it. There's some live streams on my site, I think, about fear. Lots of them, I think, around dealing with fear. But it's a simple one. The guides say, fear is not very smart, this surprised me when they said it, because they said fear doesn't transcend. Doesn't know how to. It's always operating kind of at the same level. It's kind of like, you can imagine, not to knock alligators, but like a bottom feeder at the bottom of the pond. It's not going to float above the water. It can't go there, but you can get out of the murky water, or at least go to the clear water where you can see the darn thing and move away from it. Do you understand that? And I suspect that's part of what they're instructing us in. I know that I can choose fear too. And it's not to say that even if I see a bear or an alligator, move, run, that's self-preservation. It's a little bit, but it's very different than saying, let's kill every alligator on the planet, because those are bad and evil, which is fear-based and wrong-minded.
Yeah. I read The Kingdom, and when I read it, it's one of those books. It's only happened to me a few times where it's like an instant perception shift,
Hmm.
where I went from being in a self um, perspective into everything is God, you know,
Hmm.
God is, and it made me remember that like God is either everything or he's nothing. And
Yeah.
so first off, I just want to say thank you for putting out such a powerful book that has that ability. Um, my question is, I go through these periods in my life where I forget
Hmm.
for a while, and then
Hmm.
I'll have something like this book that I read and
Hmm.
it opens me up, and I'm
Hmm.
just like, oh my gosh, God is everything. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, what advice do you have to stay there, to remember?
I don't know. I mean, I don't always remember it. I
Yeah.
really don't. But I do think that there's expansion and contraction. It's
Mm,
like the tide goes in and out, and I think that we have to integrate these big awarenesses. You know, I I didn't know that I could step into people, like living people, and become them. Like I can sometimes I start to resemble them. I do their gestures, but I hear them. I'm a radio until I was doing it. And then I had to go, oh my God, I'm really doing this. I wasn't trying to. Somebody said, oh my God, you look just like my father, when she asked about her father. And I tuned into him without even thinking.
mm,
And again and again and again, I found it happened every time. But why am I telling you this story? There was a reason for it. It's a digression.
to remember.
Well, it's about the learning how to integrate
Mm,
the experience. Oh, I know what it was, because now that's normal to me. I don't think twice. It's just normal.
mm,
And if I were to, I wouldn't want to necessarily, but if I could step into my 25-year-old self for 10 minutes, I mean, I would probably have enormous compassion for that kid and love, who was so frightened and messed up. But I would feel like a different person in many ways, I expect, and like the same person in others. But I think the growth, it's kind of like it wouldn't occur to you to put on your pants from junior high school now.
yeah.
They wouldn't fit.
Mm,
It's just there. That's what was then. That was it. And that's how I think how growth occurs. We outgrow things. They stop being, part of our reality. And then we don't even realize that we've grown out of the clothes. We just know that we're wearing something else.
thank you. Yeah. So first, how can we support you on your journey? Our followers will love this interview and they'll want to know how they can get in touch with you, how they can support you.
Well, I don't know. The support is welcome. It's not required. My website's the place to find my work,
Mm,
and that's just my name, paulselig.com.
mm,
And I do online workshops. I do an intensive once a month online, and on Wednesday nights, I'm usually channeling a class that people can join. And I'm now starting to do live events again. So, I'm going to be in different parts of the world. The guides working with groups of people is an enormous experience energetically, and I enjoy it as
mm.
well. So, I think that's it.
Yeah.
The books,
And
the
what's the
books are
upcoming book
available.
about? Yeah.
What?
The upcoming book. What's the upcoming book going to be about?
Oh man, the upcoming book is called Resurrection. I don't remember what it's about. I really don't. It's a trip. I remember that. It's different than the other ones.
Hmm.
In some ways. The Kingdom was the last of a trilogy, and they're now taking us from that into the idea of sort of the resurrected self, the divine as manifest. So this is book one of what's being called the Manifestation Trilogy. But I think that was the publisher asked for that, and the book is the guides are calling Resurrection. So
Mm,
I'm just proofing it now, and I really often don't read them. I dictate them. I look at the transcripts before it goes to the publisher, but I don't usually fully remember what's been said until I'm sitting in the recording studio to do the audiobook, and that's when I really understand what the book was about, because I have to read it through. But it's about being the divine self. That much I can tell you.
Yeah, beautiful. And so this will be my last question, just to take that a step further, is with everything going on in the world, people might be looking for a little extra strength to be able to be that divine self. What advice do you have for our collaborative right now?
Don't listen to fear.
Mm,
Um, this is all great change. I don't think much of it's necessarily how we would choose it
Mm.
or the way we would want it. But the guys are talking, they've been talking about this stuff for years. You know, it's all in them, it's all in there. And they've said in the first book, humanity is at a time of reckoning. And a
mm,
reckoning is a facing of the self and all of its creations, and all that's been created in fear must be recreated in a higher way. So I think we're at a moment right now. We just put a channeling up online about this time. Just that was actually dictated about a week ago before things got crazy. But I trust. I hear trust, trust, trust,
mm.
trust, 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 and I'll leave it there. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I
You're
really,
welcome.
all of your channelings, I've never felt so much like, it's so true. It always makes me feel like I'm remembering something I already knew.
It's great,
So
as
just
it should be.
yeah, and
Thank you
thank you
for
so much
having me.
for coming
You're
on
Yeah, it
welcome.
was
with
awesome
us.
to get to know you a little more. Thank you, Paul.
Appreciate
Yes.
it. Take
And
care,
we'll send
both of
you love to everybody.
you.
Bye,
Okay.
everybody.